board encourages members of the public to attend work sessions and listen to the discussion, but generally there's no opportunity for public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the board or wishing to do so during the board's regular meeting scheduled this evening. Today, I'm going to open the meeting. Today we're going to have a conversation about the budget process. And I'd like to thank staff for putting this together, and we look forward to hearing your report.
Do you want me to go, or do you want to go?
Yeah, we had some discussion, I think, during last year's budget process that we probably hadn't looked at the budget process for a few years, and I think that's always good practice. So we just scheduled this, present the current budget process, and have you guys can have some discussion about whether there's any changes you think are appropriate for the budget process. So it's just presentation is just meant to inform and stimulate some discussion. And so, Monica.
So I'm just going to kind of go through these slides, and some of them are slides that we also share during our budget training process. So this is information that gets conveyed on an annual basis to all of the department heads and their staff who help them prepare the budgets. And so this first slide here is just a quote from the Board of Commissioners budget policies, which is that staff shall prepare fiscally conservative budgets and will seek savings wherever a balance between cost efficiency and the quality of public service can be achieved. And so that's just kind of something that we highlight at the start of the process for all staff.
Monica? Because this, you've been telling us this in times. How do we look at that? I mean, how do we, because I've heard it and heard it and heard it, and I realized you keep telling me, and then I don't know exactly how we look at, because we're talking about being prudent, but we're also talking about doing public service. How do we?
And so during this meeting or this presentation, I'm hoping that I will answer some of those questions. And so, so with this next slide, this is just kind of the calendar of events that happen. And so basically, starting in November and January, we establish a budget calendar. We update any forecasts as far as things that we've learned that may be changing, whether that's positions that had to be added during the current fiscal year, or things that we've learned from the state or from the federal government. And then we also are creating our cost sheets, and so during that time we are projecting any insurance rate increases, any tax rates, Social Security, all the different costs associated with personnel, as well as any negotiated contract increases, such as the 2.5% COLA for all of our union members. During the months of January through, and so then we distribute those cost sheets to all of the departments, so that way they can see what it is that they currently have and what they currently have is going to cost them next year with those increases. If there's anything that is inaccurate, like they've had a change of staff positions or anything like that, or they know of something that's going to be happening because they know that somebody's going to be retiring or has already submitted, that they're leaving, we make adjustments to those cost sheets so that way whatever it is we're budgeting is as accurate as possible. And during that time, we also distribute the indirect cost rates. So for all of the different we call them central service departments, so like HR, county manager, budget and finance. All the non-general fund departments pay for indirect costs because those are costs that the general fund departments pay as well, but we just don't charge ourselves to recoup from ourselves. So we also distribute those to all the departments as well. So then in the months of January through March, this is when we start engaging the staff. And so in January, that's when they're giving us back the cost sheets, anything that they have changes for.
Is that the second one here?
Yes. Sorry, it didn't print out.
Yeah, it's very hard to read this, unfortunately.
It's better in color.
Yeah.
I have the same problem. Mine's in black.
And then in February, we start our annual training, and then that's when we open up our general ledger budget module so that staff can then go in and start entering in their projections for the current year. So they basically say, okay, this is what I budgeted for 17-18, and this is what I actually anticipate on spending. They may be saying things are happening that we didn't anticipate, so we're going to be spending more, or perhaps they're saying, no, actually we're going to be coming in under, and so we're going to realize savings. And so they're helping us project how we're going to finish out the year. So then that gives us an idea of what kind of beginning fund balance we'll have for the 18-19 process.
So let me ask you then, because this year Commissioner Sullivan replaced a commissioner who didn't go outside Clatsop County. And I think nobody was monitoring that. Nobody said, oh, look, she's going to County College, she's going to meetings in the Valley. So the commissioner's budget, does anybody?
That's how we knew to do a budget adjustment. And so what
We
we
monitor
budgeted,
it every
yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't know that because that, it wasn't part of my ken when we said, what are you gonna, no, because nobody said to me, what are you gonna do this year? You know, what conferences do you have, what meetings do you have, what other kinds of things do you plan to carry out your work as a commissioner? So that's what I'm used to being called upon to do and to respond to, so we can build a budget for us that's reflective at the beginning of the process, the way you're describing staff does for staff activities. So I wonder if it's useful if we talk about, you know, what are you going to want to do as a commissioner this year, and are there costs associated with it? It just might be useful.
Yeah.
My costs have been consistently the same over the last 7 years. So that gives probably a really good benchmark as on the level of your typical commissioner's engagement,
And that's
travel, and AOC, for instance. So
And that's really similar to what we have staff do. And so the first part that they do is they project how they're going to finish out the year, and they get those forms submitted to us. And then the next couple of weeks, they are then saying what they anticipate next year's budget is going to cost them. So they do receive a base budget if they're a general fund department. So basically, they receive their personnel costs based on those cost sheets, and then they have a 0 increase in materials and services, and that's per the Board of Commissioners policies. A couple years ago, we did, for a one-time increase, allow a 3% increase to that amount, and then it came back down. And that's something that we evaluate each year as well. If there's any significant changes or any significant changes in travel that they're wanting to do, then they put those requests out. And so that's where they, are asking, we need to have an additional person, these are the reasons. And so they fill out another form so that way it can be looked at. And then we can see, once we have all the information from the departments, what kinds of additional funds we have available to grant those additional requests. But when they're building their budget, they're looking at their historical information. So kind of like what Commissioner Lee was saying, as far as they have their past 3 years that they look at for historical information to see, if there's been any significant changes, or if it's been static, or if they know of something coming up. And so during that time is the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I've just been hearing a lot from community people about increased needs, and I've been communicating that to everybody here, but I'm looking for how to integrate that input from the community through me into our process, and so that's what I'm trying to wrap my mind around and to help us discuss it together. So it's a collaborative venture.
Okay. And so then in the months of March and April, we then take all of that information, the Budget and Finance Department does, and we input it and kind of clean up some of the stuff that the departments have submitted. And then we sit down in March with all the different department heads and go over the budgets that they have submitted. And so we go through and we look at what they're projecting, how they're going to finish out the year, and then we look at what they're requesting. And then at that time, if they have additional requests, that's when they're talking to us about those requests, whether it's for additional personnel or if there's some sort of program change, and they are explaining, the need, and a lot of them will come in with like statistical information to just kind of help support the request that they're making. And so that happens during March and April. In April, we have to have all the finalized requests made, and so then if there are those additional FTE or program change requests, those have either been approved or, said, sorry, but we're not able to accommodate that request at this time. And then we have to get the document out to printing. So then that way in May, we can distribute those, because we typically have the board budget committee meeting that first week in May, and we try to get the document to you guys at least a week in advance, so that way you have time to review the information. This slide here is just, again, when we meet with departments and we go through the budget training, these are things that are currently in the board adopted budget policies. And these budget policies historically.
Yeah, and I just want to stop there. I want to be really clear about this, because I know Commissioner Thompson mentioned this a minute ago. These are not our policies. These are your policies that you gave to us, and we're following it.
I got it, but
So-
they're inherited policies, and I'm looking.
But you can change them. They're your
But see,
policies.
that's what I'm looking to understand, because it's not clear to me how we would do that. And so I'm struggling to understand if we wanted to consider changing them. How could we have a data-infused discussion? How could we involve interested community members? How could we look at this? How could we consider this? Because I'm used to being part of budget systems that are sort of iterative with policymakers all through the year, so that policymakers have a chance to have input into that. And I understand you're carrying out a real completely. And then it's like, well, okay, but is that how we want to continue doing it? Because we might consider something else that might be easier for everybody and more responsive to community, you know, would work better. That's what I'm looking to
That's why we're here today.
Yeah.
So in January is when every January we bring the board policies to you guys to either approve as they or adopt as presented to you, or if you want to make any changes to them. And that happens typically at the second meeting in January is where you guys adopt your budget policies. And so that's an opportunity to, if you want to make changes to the budget policies, which is when the 3% change did occur, that was something that happened, and then it was stated, you know, that it was to only be for that 1 year. And so then the next year, when we brought the budget policies back to you, we had taken that 3% back out of the budget policies.
Yeah, it's just that it happens at one meeting, and it always feels kind of rushing, because I'm used to having a more deliberative process over a longer period of time, where we look at, you know, for example, we were sitting on the dais looking at, do we want to give more money to some community organizations? And it was at the end of the process, it wasn't integrated, and if we had looked at that back in January, if we considered options, or maybe even in, I don't know, November, December, if we start to look at, do we want to do that, that'd give us a chance to look at all of the decision points we had. And it just might be a more comfortable, more easygoing process. It wouldn't feel quite so up against the wall.
Okay. So again, these are just some of the information from the policies, and that's that the general fund departments are presented with a base budget, which include no new staff or reclassifications. Departments are required to fully pursue outside revenue sources. Savings during the current fiscal year should not be spent without approval. So, you know, if somebody had a staff position that ended up being vacated, they can't just go and then spend that personnel savings on buying a bunch of new equipment or something like that. And then it's against county policy to backfill any shortfalls in state or federal funding with county revenue.
What does that mean?
So if the state decides to quit giving us funding, rather than continuing with that program, the county isn't just going to then start picking up that program and using county resources to pay for it. And so in some instances, that program might get cut.
And that includes grant-filled?
Yes, yeah,
okay,
yeah.
But if we talked about it and we thought, you know, our community still needs this, maybe we could do some gap funding until we found another way to look for grant funds to pay for it. I mean, that might be possible, so there would be continuity of services, and we wouldn't just pay for it in, you know, forever into the future, but maybe, I mean, just trying to look at all the different ways we could approach services delivery that were still prudent.
And we do that, and in some instances, you have to be cautious, because if the county does start filling a program, and then the county can no longer afford it, they can't necessarily just cut that program. And so those are things that we do look at, whether or not it's feasible for us to continue on with providing the program.
Yeah, and those would really be case-by-case decisions at the time. You know, we would make you aware of that, and you would have to make a decision. You know, do you want to appropriate additional funding to continue a program? Do you, or do you want to let it go? What do you want to do?
Except in years past, we've had to, buoy the net ban fishery, and the Class 9 hatchery. And those were decisions that, the board had decided were very important programs we needed to support, even if the state pass-through dollars, were unpredictable.
Well, it's the same thing with, we just approved $360,000 for the justice reinvestment, which I think is, I would like to see more of those types of programs, but I think that we, as a county, need to put our money where our mouth is and not necessarily just depend on grant funding every year. So that's something that I think we can look at as a board, is what our overall goals are, which I think we still need to work on.
So this slide here talks about the Clatsop County Long-Term Financial Plan. And so again, per the board policies, it's a requirement that we draft a fiscally responsible budget. And part of the long-term financial plan is to control the size of county government by matching spending to available resources, maintain adequate reserves, and pay for ongoing expenses from permanent funds and not volatile revenue sources.
So when I looked at, because I thought this was a really interesting report, but then I looked and I thought we'd seen a big growth, 164% is the figure that comes to mind, in the reserve funds. And we looked at having 2 months, but then we had 4 months. And I thought, well, has our balance point shifted? And so I'm looking at how do we integrate this report into how we look at the long-term financial plan. And I think that's worthy of another workshop because it's so important, because it's the foundation piece. That's really the way we most directly express our will to you. And so I think if we as a board look at that more, we're going to be able to work more congruently with you as staff.
So I'm not sure I understand your question, because in the financial plan, it talks about like a 4-month reserve, and you currently have, it's referenced in your current policies as a percentage of, and so it's 25% of expenditures.
Yeah, I just want to understand this better. I want to have us understand it better and talk about it among ourselves with you so that we're all on the same page, because people ask me about what am I getting that I'm paying for, and so I want to be able to, and I can tell them, we'll go look at the document online, but they're not buying that. They want.
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, the audit, you're talking about the long-term financial audit that we just had. And there were some insights that they saw there, and how are we going to integrate that into next year's budget? I think that's very worthy for us to look at.
And most of those integrations will occur in your policies.
Right, but we'll have to set aside some time to, if you say you see this here or that, I mean, I think we need to work on that.
Just really understand it better. So if we're taking the time to communicate about these things, we'll understand each other better.
And so something else just to think about that staff has to work on when they're drafting their budgets is that oftentimes they are crafting it with only future estimates. Oregon legislature often doesn't approve their spending levels until near the end of the county's budget process in June, and our departments have to submit their forecasts in March or February, and then they can update them in March. So a lot of times, that's why we end up having several budget adjustments because of this situation. The federal fiscal year begins in October. We begin in July. State timber revenues, that's something else that can vary greatly. So that's why we use the 15-year low as a projection. And then just during the current fiscal year, outside revenue resources may fall short from estimates. And so then those need to be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. And then most importantly is the county must adopt a balanced budget for all funds. And a balanced budget is defined as a budget where planned expenditures do not exceed the amount of resources available in accordance with the state law. And so something else that we don't allow departments to do is to budget expenditures for a grant that they want to try to apply for. If they don't know that they're not going to be able to have those grant funds, they can't budget those expenditures. They can then come and do a budget adjustment for unanticipated grant revenue, but it's not something that you can have the expense in there and not know for certain that you're gonna have those revenues.
Gambling.
Yeah.
Don't spend the money before you have it.
I mean, beyond what we do with the state as far as just kind of forecasting in instances. Oops, I skipped a page. So there's certain things that the county must provide, and that's statutorily required, and those services are elections, health services, land use and planning, law enforcement and jail management, property deed recording and survey mapping, road construction and maintenance, and tax assessment and collection. And so these are all things that statutorily we are required to provide to our citizens. And that's under the health services, yeah. This here is just kind of a general slide that we also kind of include because it highlights the general fund and the limitations that there are. And so generally increases in spending in one program requires reductions in one or more other programs unless a new revenue is identified or savings are realized within a department's budget. And so if there is a need that we identify, like in the public safety realm, and our resources are fixed, then if we want to increase something that we're providing in public safety, then that means in some other area we're going to have to reduce services that are being provided there. And so those are the things that when departments come to us with these additional requests of whether program changes or staff changes, those are the things that we're looking at. Okay, well, you know, what is the need of your requests versus this request, and what, you know, ideally, what can we do to accommodate all the requests? And then if that's not possible, you know, we look at different solutions to not put a burden on somebody else by making a cut there, but being able to maintain things there, but also increase something someplace else.
So the general government at 43.3%, is that the,
The 43.7%? Or,
it says here 43.3.
oh yeah, 43.3. So that includes like the Board of Commissioners, County Manager, Human Resources, Budget and Finance, IT, Buildings and Grounds.
So the general support it,
Yeah,
and that reach the rest of it,
yeah,
the overhead.
uh-huh.
Okay, good.
Yeah. And so that's pretty much all that I had. I wanted to leave a lot of it open so that way you guys can ask any questions or make any recommendations, but, and I can go back to any slides if you have any, if you want me to or anything.
Thank you for
Thank
that
you, Ron.
report.
Yeah.
I think it's important to have this, and I look forward to the conversation.
So does that make sense to you, though, that we kind of spread it out and go more in depth sort of throughout the period of time? I want us to talk about, you know, this audit, this financial audit, and really look at what are our options and what it costs. So it's a data-driven discussion, not just kind of hurried or a subjective opinion, but really let's look at financial alternatives for growing revenue, for providing services, for all of this. Does that make sense that we spread it out a little longer?
It is a 6-month process.
Well, but our part of it, where we're interacting with you, because fundamentally, when I come up against it, I can come and ask you questions, because you know I'll come and ask you questions. But what I'm looking for is that we, as a body, are having these discussions so that we're contemplating the implications of the policies we're setting. And that's what I'm really looking for. In the real world, what happens or doesn't happen according to the policies we set and the way we tell our staff to implement them. That's what I'm looking for.
I'm pleased with how the process is rolled out. I'm sorry that you felt that it hasn't been as open as, or however you've described it, but, you know, it took me a couple years of studying the budget before I was really able to really get the flow of it. And where I'm at now is that it's really easy for me. If I see something that I don't understand, it's probably going to who to ask. And Monica and Cam have been really like, if I have some question, that's usually the next day, you know, the things that I'm interested in, a lot of times, in raising the funds, a lot of times, for instance, some of the long-term projects that we want to complete, you know, like the jail remodel and stuff like that. To me, those are where we can really focus our energies on, as a group, as a board, to lobby for these larger projects. But as far as the day-to-day running of the budget process, I'm pleased. Those who have known me over the years know that I've been satisfied with the way the budget process works, and I have no serious concerns.
I agree.
About the process, and I think the staff does an excellent job, and I think that they're here for us if we have questions and concerns.
So if I hear you clearly, what you prefer is that I ask my questions as an individual, and if I have issues, then to bring them back to the board. Is that the process that you would?
Absolutely. I mean, you can
Okay.
bring up anything that you have an issue of concern through any vehicle that you deem is appropriate.
I have a few comments, if I may. First of all, thank you, Monica.
Yeah.
And I know that you all work very hard on this budget. One of my concerns is, for instance, the monthly, or the bulletin that Tom Bent puts out, there was no mention of this work meeting on that. So one of my biggest things is public input. And I don't see that the budget committee was invited to this work session.
Because this is about what the board wants to do. Well, I wanted to present the process, but the process starts with the board policies.
Right, and I think we need to revisit the board policies and revisit the goal setting, but I've gone through that and we'll see what happens with that. But, because I don't know how you're setting a budget when we don't, in my mind, have clear goals. For instance, the jail. What I remember from the goal-setting meeting, we talked about the jail, and at that point there was a figure of $5 million. Recently, the figures that came out was up to $11 million. That's a big switch, and in between now and then, we have not had a lot of input. I know we're going to have a work session at the end of this month, but this is a very complicated thing, and for my own personal what I'm interested in when we talk about justice and law and order, I know that we need a new jail, but we also need drug treatment. I also would like to see more justice reinvestment dollars here. There's a grant that basically is not going to be even asked for because we're not prepared to deal with that. I think that's a shame that we have money, and particularly in this legislative session that was so hard fought, that there was money put aside. And we are not in the position, for whatever reason, to even go after that money. And so I don't know if that's something that we can, I talked to Paul Williams about it, and that's what he told me, that the strings that are attached to that kind of money, they are not ready yet. And maybe in a year or so, I'm sorry, you're on the committee, so maybe you already know about this. But don't you go to the public safety committee?
Right.
Yeah.
The Justice Reinvestment Grant is from the state. It was set up by the state. We don't really have, other than applying for it.
That's what I'm talking about, applying for it.
Well, we have applied for it.
You applied for one of the grants. There was another grant.
Yeah,
There
we
was a
get
second
money every year under that.
Right.
But like frankly, with all money coming from the state or federal government,
I know there's
you don't want to
strings
take it all.
attached. I know,
'cause sometimes
I know.
it actually costs you more
Right.
than you actually get.
But I think that's something I'm interested in learning more about. And I think that the people that I've talked to that are involved in the system are also interested in and also care about. I've talked to judges, I've talked to you know, Dr. Duncan, who was there are some big questions that we need to talk about, which I don't know if that goes under policy or whatever.
So
We'll
that
see
would,
what the work.
that goes, so in your board policies, you guys have those 5 goals, and currently,
Right.
public safety and justice
I know.
is your #1 priority. And so those are the things where, you know, those goals, if you want to adjust those goals from what they currently are, that's the opportunity to do that.
Right, and as we've talked about before, I think that what I saw as a friction with the goal-setting meeting was I wanted a chance for the commissioners to sit and talk together, and you needed a time to have the department heads present, which I think is fine. I would like to see, we're talking about what we'd like to see in the future. I would like to see, I don't want to miss the opportunity to talk to the department heads, but I still would like to have that, maybe we need a longer process, or maybe we need to start it earlier, so that we can finish up talking about how we want to adjust or refine our goals in order for the budget to follow that in a more meaningful way. Now, the actual budget meeting, I think it is telling, though, that on this thing, that the one point where the county commissions are mentioned is one block here. And I think that it is possible to hear more throughout the year. And we have people on the budget committee that have applied. It's a 3 or 4 year stint. They are citizens that are interested in this. They're the ones who bring this story back out to the public. Why can't they be more involved with this? I think that the comments that I've heard are, I don't want to just be a rubber stamp committee. Why am I putting this time in if I'm just going to rubber stamp it? Well, how do you get around that? You allow them to have more input. You allow them to have more information.
It's
at an
been
earlier
my,
time.
excuse me, Kathleen, but it's been my experience since I've been on the commission that we receive reports regularly about the budget process. It isn't just at the end of, or in June, that it's ongoing. And I feel like we are informed, and people can come to these meetings. The
I know
budget, the budget committee can come to these meetings. They can hear it too.
But if I can involve myself in this, but the participation in the decision-making process. I mean, I've had experiences in other states, in other jurisdictions, where public members come in and staff talks about, because they understand it's the public who's making the money and paying the taxes that gives us any money at all to allocate. And so we want a healthy communication, and we don't want to just tell them, this is what we decided, this is what we decided, this is what we involve them, this is what we're thinking about, how does this work for you, what do you think about the community needs, what do you think about our process, and I think that's a more flexible and robust process. Now, if all the board then want to be involved with it, maybe those of us for whom this is an abiding interest could involve ourselves with it.
That's a problem too. I mean, I know that Monica's done a good job coming and giving quarterly reports. I'm not saying that she's not. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is a different thing. And the budget meeting was extremely painful. A 9-hour meeting with a 15-minute lunch break. We didn't have full representation on there from either the budget committee nor the commissioners. And I do not want that repeated. I don't think that's fair to us or the citizens. And I would like for us in this coming year to safeguard that doesn't happen again. Now, and I think 9 hours is too doggone long for a budget meeting.
Well, we've had.
And I think, excuse me, and I know that you want to print up the document, but it would be helpful to have the document more than a week ahead of time. It's a gigantic document. And I mean, if indeed we're here to talk about what we'd like to see different, I know I'm the new person on the block, but I'm just telling you what I would like to see. Now, what happens, we'll see, but I mean, that's my input, and my input is not just me as an individual. I've talked to other people too.
Just if I could make a couple of comments. Nobody wants to sit on a rubber stamp committee, and the budget committee actually made changes at the committee meeting, frankly, over the recommendations of county management, which is a clear indication it wasn't just a rubber stamp. They were changing things in the budget. and that's their role. I'm not criticizing that. And I also think sometimes, to me, there's a distinction between creating opportunities for people to have input into the process and them actually having input. I think we create lots of opportunities. Now, why we don't get as much input, that one I can't really explain. But there are abundant opportunities at various points during the budget. You know, this thing was all
Can you
public.
give me an example? Maybe I'm not understanding what the budget opportunities are.
So.
We publish the budget online, and it's out there for a couple of months, and we ask for public input.
But that's
It's-
different
it's
than
post-
if I can say. I participated in robust public participation processes that are announced, that are staff supported, where people come together and have an exchange, because it's useful, it's productive for members of the public, and I can do it at the library, because that happens fairly often, and I like that. But it's also good to have it part of our process. It's the perception of how willing we are to consider what somebody says, and we don't have to change. We may change. I didn't see a lot of change. What I remember in our goal setting that was extremely frustrating to me, I remember saying housing and economic development matter. And what I heard was, well, you've already decided in January what the priorities are, and wanting them to change, even though we all said housing really matters, it didn't change really.
We-
Well, how do
Excuse
you-
me, we have in our meeting today about housing, we are moving forward with that. It was heard. Staff is responsive
In
to
terms
us.
of our first priority, it's still public safety. That's what I'm talking about.
But
Well,
you also have, and that's where it gets to be the difficult piece, is because you can only have one number one goal. And so public safety and justice is something that Kathleen was just describing. And so we did add FTE in public safety and justice. Housing is something that you've described, and we did add FTE in planning and building codes. And so even though you can only have one number one goal, one number two goal, one number three goal, it's not that that's where all the focus goes. And so we did what we could to improve things, because we also, so public safety and justice, we've increased. We have the pretrial release position and additional,
Right,
an
and I'm
additional
really
deputy.
happy about that.
And then the next goal is public health, and mental health is a big concern there. So
Yes, it
we've
is.
added a behavioral health coordinator position that unfortunately we're having a difficult time filling.
well, we
but
thought we had it filled.
yeah, we
but
thought we
we're
had
still
it filled. But anyways, that was an additional FTE that we added, and so that's your number two goal. And then in,
Could I just
uh-huh,
interrupt you?
yeah.
So at the AOC Housing Committee, we talk about this and the fact that housing impacts literally every other aspect of public service. And for that reason, because it's part of public safety, it's part of mental health, it's part of public health, it has jumped up and become a top priority for that statewide organization. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. And when I talk to the planning staff, as I did this week, because there's a planning issue in my part of the world, and I'm told because we don't have a code enforcement person now, and they don't, they do not have a code enforcement
It's
person.
shared with a couple
Well,
people.
it's shared, and what that means is other planning work isn't getting done. That's what I'm told by staff, that's what I have to tell taxpayers and concerned public people in my part, so
Well,
that's why I keep.
I do have to say, that's different than what I get told by staff, so
Well, no,
if I had heard that
well,
from staff,
I
we would have tried to address
I
it.
asked if that staff were willing to be quoted in the bus, because I know that you've said one thing, I've said another thing. How do we decide what's true?
Well, I'm just repeating what they
I
told me.
got it, and me too.
Well, we have talked about enforcement in the housing, different,
Yeah.
we have
And
talked.
Absolutely.
and so again, we have an additional person who's getting hired in the planning department. But again, we run into, as far as recruitment and applications and stuff. So these are all
There's no
positions.
place for them to live.
Well,
I know.
Right.
and to a certain extent, we're doing everything, we do have the housing study that we are planning to do. So to a certain extent, we're doing what we can to help with the housing situation. But, and that's why we've got the cities involved as well, because they need to be, while we might want it to be a number one priority for us and the state wants it to be a number one priority for them, we can't force our number one priority on the other, the cities.
They're saying it's number one. I mean, they, again, like, yeah, I'm not just talking for myself, I'm expressing a lot of people through me to try and have us work together to respond. And I believe that you are, but, you know, where's the balance point? And trying to look at where we think the balance point should be, because that's a budgeting process. That's how it works.
But one thing I really think is important, not to get lost in this whole discussion, is from a staff standpoint, when we're looking to guidance from you, you know, we're looking for what your collective goals are. And so whatever it is that the majority of the commission supports, you know, that's sort of the direction that we're obligated to go. And so that may never perfectly line up, you know, with any individual commissioner's priorities. But for us, you know, that's what we need. We need direction to say 3 or 4 or 5 commissioners say this is a priority. And if we don't have that, it makes our job pretty difficult, because I don't want to decide what the priorities are for the county.
Well, I think one way that might possibly help that is that if we can build more time within the agenda where we as commissioners can discuss these things. Because I really believe it's important, and I've said this before, but I really believe it's important that we talk as a body together in public, so that we can hear each other's conversation and what we're saying. And I know we do already, but for instance, on the housing issue, I'm going to bring up some issues with the housing, and I know I know that it's like we talked about it, but where did we go from here to here? And the staff report, you know, it's already budgeted. I don't remember anything being said at the budget meeting. And so we'll talk about that later, but the same thing with the jail. You know, I think we need, and maybe this will happen in the work study, but I think some of these topics, maybe we can bring a topic up on the agenda and say, what do you feel about this? And we can talk about it with some input, and then you'll get your feedback. We'll have a chance to hear each other. And because right now, we have a very tight agenda, and other than asking questions about what the staff is saying, I don't know, that may be a way, because I am wanting to hear more from the other commissioners.
For me, it works better to have a goal-setting meeting separate from the regular meetings, but because otherwise it's piecemeal, and I know you didn't like it, it was too long, but
What are you talking about?
when we had the meeting that, where we all met, the commissioners met,
The
and the
3
staff
different
was
times.
there.
Right.
Yeah. I don't see what's wrong with that.
No, what I had said earlier is that I agree with you that we needed to have the department heads talk, and I had already said this. And I think we need to, but it's 2 separate processes. For the board to discuss their goals and their policies, and then to have the department heads talk, and then they mesh together. And what it appeared to happen this year was we had a very short period of time when we talked, but I don't think anything really got resolved there. And then we had the department heads talking. And so to me,
Well, the department heads took up 1 of the 3 meetings.
well, they really took up about 2 of them.
There was 1 presentation at the 3rd meeting from 1 department head who couldn't be at the 2nd meeting.
Right, but when we look at what
And
the
that was it. So
goals
there
were that we
basically were
got,
2 meetings
we
there.
looked at what the goals were. We don't have, you know, step-by-step, like the jail, and this is what we want out of that, housing, and this is what we want out of that. It seemed like it was kind of it wasn't as clarified as I would have liked it to be. And I think we can do better than that. So, and I think that one way that we're going to do better than that is for us to talk together as a body.
Sure.
It
And
is,
then when I'm talking about feedback during the agenda, during the year is it's another way to have, like when these things come up, it's something new, like whatever that we have some time to talk about it as a group.
however, what we talked about in those goal-setting meetings are the very things that you're saying you wanted to see more of, and that's what staff has been working on.
I'm not here dissing the staff. That's not what I'm saying. Is that what you're hearing?
I'm hearing a lot of dissatisfaction, and yet what I saw happen at the goal-setting meeting is what the things that you're talking about, and staff went to work on it. So I don't really understand what the problem is with having our goal-setting meeting and working with staff, and I understand you want it outlined differently, but it's working. As far as I can see, it's
Okay,
working.
I hear that you're saying that it's working for you, and
There's-
what I'm saying is
there's
it's
always
not working for me,
opportunities for
so.
improvement. I mean, no matter how well something's working, there's an opportunity to try to make it better.
I can agree with that.
So,
Okay, do we find common ground? Is there a little bit of common ground? That'd be good.
So would you like me to, because typically the board policies come before you either the first or second meeting in January, I can present you with the board policies at the first meeting, the only meeting that you have in December. And then you have an opportunity to review them and look at your goals, and then you can submit that information.
or as an
think that's a great
alternative,
idea.
or as an alternative, we could have a work session like this in December and say, you know, here's the policies you set last year. In January, you know, we're expecting you to
Adopt.
tell us what
And
you're.
I think that's fine too, but like, I would like to have a chance to look them over and then have a work session. It's because I can't, I think that's a great idea, Monica, thank you.
That's good. Thank you for responding, staff, to concerns. Because I hear, how do you bridge the gaps between us, which is always challenging, and I understand that. But for those of us who have deep-seated, passionate convictions about public process, for example, and using our experiences, it's important to be heard. And I feel more heard tonight.
Okay.
Okay,
Um,
so we'll
that
look
was-
at doing something in December, kind of a prelim, you know, before we actually start the budget process in January.
And if there is an opportunity, yes, and if there's an opportunity so that we have interested members of the public who want to participate, I mean, our elected representatives have town halls all the time. Well, those are one way because they've got too many people. But if we could have a process where we actually, there are people here tonight who are very interested and knowledgeable about our budgeting process and the numbers in it. And I'd really like to honor what they care about and listen to them.
And it-
Effectively
But they have to come forward.
And
We
I,
can't
and
make them
I
do
think
that.
it might be interesting for us to maybe perhaps send out a survey to the budget committee and ask them what their experience was and what they would like to have, so they get some input from them.
No, I think that would be good too, and just kind of back to the budget process this year, but, and again, we don't really set that, I don't like 9-hour meetings either, but that was the majority of the committee decided
Well,
that's what
part
they
of
wanted
that,
to do
you know,
that day.
I have to say, because I was new enough at it, I didn't know how long it was gonna last. I will never sit through a meeting like that again, I'll tell you
Yeah.
that.
Well, again, we had time set up the next day and the day after.
Right, but
they
I
decided
guess
they
we
wanted to
needed
push
somebody
through
in the
and
room
get it
to
done.
say, you know what, we've got another day, we'll meet again, because I was certainly, and I had set aside a tour of the Oregon Youth Authority that I didn't go to because of that meeting, and I have not had a chance to go
So
since
how
then.
about if we check in with commissioners to see what our schedules are? Because some of us have commitments. I mean, I urged to push through because I had other commitments, other days and other
Well,
places.
right, and we
So-
had changed the original calendar
Yeah.
based on some feedback.
Yeah, the
And-
original calendar was changed,
But we
and,
weren't consulted.
And
Nobody
well,
said.
so again, that's when I distribute the budget policies, if you can look at those closely, because the calendar is in the policies that I
No,
send
that's-
out in January.
But that's
And
exactly
so-
the issue that I'm talking about, is that you send out a calendar without consulting with us.
So-
Well,
about
actually,
our availability.
but again, you know, I want to be clear that that's not what we do. What we do is we propose a calendar to you in January, and the budget meeting's not till April. And I think that gives you plenty of time to say, I can't make that date in April, we have plenty of time to change it. That's why we do it.
right, but I like Monica's idea of sending out the draft in December, so we have a chance to read it, and then we can talk about it. And then I think that, and I would like to have a survey of some sort, reach out to the budget committee to ask what their experience was and what the improvements, I mean, I think that's not only, every conference I go to, they ask for surveys. It's only appropriate to ask for feedback.
And just to complete this, when I said this doesn't work for me, I was refused, and I was told staff pushed back. And so that's why I keep raising, I'm just.
Okay,
what I
if we're
was
looking
told.
for a consensus, I think that making the loudest voices are not necessarily the ones that should direct staff for everything that's going to happen down the road now for the budget process. I respect what the county manager said, that it should be a majority of the commission.
So if I may clarify that, Sarah, are you saying you don't want a survey sent out to the budget committee?
I don't know
Should we
that,
vote on that? I mean, we could vote on that. Is that something you're uncomfortable with?
I want to think about it.
Okay, so can we put that on the agenda for next time we can talk about it? And are you uncomfortable with having a work session in December?
No.
So is that something we should vote on? Because I'm not sure what exactly it is that you feel that you're being bullied into.
Well, I was referring more to policies, that your policies and priorities need to reflect the majority of the commissioners. And so if the-
I would agree.
Yeah, and so that's
I don't have a
where
problem
we
with that at
need
all.
to get direction from, is that, you know, majority wants to change priorities, keep the same priorities. It doesn't matter what the decision is, we just need clear direction from the
But
commission.
I don't think it's unheard of to discuss them each year.
No, we should
I
discuss
mean,
it.
isn't that part of the process that we talk about each
Absolutely.
year?
Yeah.
And all I'm asking for in December is that we get them ahead of time so we can think about
Well,
it.
you can also look at the year before, because policies don't change much from year to year. So if you really think you need more time, to study the existing previous budget policies there can help give you a foundation and a frame of reference to move forward so that you don't feel rushed, because you've already reviewed the previous year's policies.
And the
They don't-
budget
things don't
policies are
change from
online.
Year to year very much.
Well-
It's very little changes. And those policies, you know, just look at the previous year.
But Monica did offer to do this. Is this a problem? for
No,
you,
it's not a
Monica?
problem.
Okay.
And, you know, and while we're open to the calendar, we are statutorily required to have certain steps. And so there are certain things, time constraints with staff and projects
Certain
and
dates
other
are
jobs.
too flexible.
Yeah,
Oh,
so-
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely,
yeah.
I know that.
But the scheduling so as to include commissioners who want to be included, I don't think that should be a majority thing. I think the fact that we had only 3 commissioners here this year is a subject of great concern.
Well, part of that was because the schedule got changed so many times that I had 2 different schedules. But
if
still, I'm not denying that it's not making a qualification.
just help us do the right thing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Monica.
All right, thanks.
Let's start the regular meeting at 6:00.